somehow affected by a number of challenges that we've been facing, especially of late. The whole idea of diversion of food has been creating more problems, and we have the hope and expectation. We hope and expect Dr. Catherine's presence and her agency's presence would somehow help address the challenge, not only by putting a stop to the pause that has been imposed so far, but more importantly, with our active involvement in addressing the challenge, especially by taking action against culprits who are taking away food and non-food items from the needy and using it to line their pockets. This is probably the most irresponsible and heinous crime that one can possibly be charged with, and our administration is very serious about taking action against functionaries who have been involved in those activities, private sector traders or merchants who have been involved in these activities. We have already set up a committee which is tasked with taking actions, but it also behooves the international community to take into account the fact that whatever action they are going to take is going to affect not people who have failed in their responsibility, but affect victims, children, IDPs, victims of gender-based violence who depend on badly needed humanitarian aid for survival. So one needs to take into account, but today is not essentially about humanitarian activities, although that is an important component. Dr. Catherine and her agencies are here to support us in our efforts to get our people back on their feet again. Tigray has sustained the damage unlike any other region in the country. What has happened to us is not just a simple collateral damage, which is the ordinary result of a war. Tigray was destroyed, infrastructure was destroyed, every infrastructure was targeted. Our population had to undergo untold suffering in what appeared to be madness, but unfortunately there was some method to the madness. Whether this was the involvement of Eritreans or whether this was involvement of irregular militias from different parts of the country, what has happened in Tigray with the destruction wrought on Tigray requires a concerted effort on the part of the international community, the Tigrayan diaspora, the federal government, the regional administration, and anyone who has a stake in the recovery and reconstruction of Tigray to put their efforts together. And of course, we have reason to believe that Dr. Catherine and her team are here to do just that. And we have to get our administrative structure back on its feet again. We have to start functioning government services. We have to create jobs. We have to encourage small businesses. We have to return internally displaced people to where they can produce. We have to bring our kids back to schools. We have to resuscitate our health centers, clinics, hospitals. Everything that has been destroyed needs to be back on its feet again. And of course, we have reason to believe that the UN system does not only have the wherewithal to support us, but also the intention and the willingness to extend whatever support is necessary. That said, I can only hope that with their presence here, they will renew their commitment to the people of Tigray, not only on humanitarian matters, but also on development aspects, our engagement. And I leave the floor to Dr. Catherine Sozi. And of course, that will also open the floor for Q&As, brief Q&A from members of my cabinet and representatives of the UN agencies here. Thank you.
To my UN colleagues in the room and representatives of civil society. As usual, it's a real pleasure being here and really glad to be back here in Mekelle and to have the chance to meet with you at this stage. I cannot underestimate and underemphasize that the cessation of hostilities is really has really presented a window of opportunity to scale up what we have been doing. It is very welcome, and we must congratulate you for really the efforts in moving forward the permanent cessation of hostilities agreement. I came here, I think it was signed in November, I came here in December, again in January, February, and honestly the reaction from the Tigrinians themselves and from our colleagues was one of great relief. And we, as the humanitarian and development community, have really realized that there is a need to listen to what the people have wanted. So we know that they were equally happy with the agreement. The fact that there were no guns fired since then must be appreciated, but also that they were wanting to get back to what you said, which is a sense of normalcy and joining back into the country as a part of Ethiopia. Much improvement has been done, and for my colleagues sitting in the room, we have tried very hard to respond to the life-saving needs that were apparent during the conflict. We may not have gotten everything right, but I think it's also an opportunity to thank the donors who've contributed to the support that we've been able to provide, working closely with you and also with the federal authorities. Yes, there has been much improvement, and since we have seen in the last months the resumption of basic services, today we came on Ethiopian Airlines, electricity, telephone, and yes, we understand, of course, that things are not going to be 150% immediately, but I think this goes with the process, the progress that's being made. And the flow of humanitarian assistance has been swift. Almost immediately, we got the 4 routes that were leading into Tigray opened up. And then we got all the security issues that had been impeding access reversed. And I hope and I know that even though there's a lot of work still around the humanitarian assistance that needs to be done, including reaching thousands of people who we never were able to reach during the conflict. And I know that from the conversation with you that there's still people in some parts of the region who we need to make extra effort to meet, that really these critical needs continue to be something that we need to keep our foot on the accelerator. The humanitarian needs continue. There are still displaced persons within the region. The return of IDPs is important, but it's important that it's done with dignity, that it's done voluntarily, and that they have where they need to go, which is safe and secure. I know my colleagues, I've come here with Mamadou from UNHCR, with Turan from IDP. I've got Dawn and Clemens from the international NGO. Oh, did I say IDP? Yes. Oh, Turan from UNHCR.
You will have the return of IDP. You will have the return together with Mamadou and I.
But really the idea is to sort of say, yes, we still need the humanitarian work to continue, but we're also listening to you, and what your communities are saying is that they want to move towards the early recovery, they want the rehabilitation, they want the reconciliation efforts to also be considered. And each time when we have this conversation, it's always to say, okay, if we were in that position, what is it that we would want? And I think that it equates to exactly that. People want jobs, people want health services, kids need to go back to school. As we were discussing this morning, whether the schoolroom has windows or not, it's the presence and being part of a community that allows them to feel, in a sense, back to some sense of normality, even for the parents, for the women, for the men. Of course, and I will talk much more a little bit about what we are proposing to you. Of course, we are concerned about the reports of the aid diversion. We talked this morning. But we are keen to avert future diversions and are really encouraged by your task force that you have set up. And for us within the UN, we've done similar, and WFP is also taking several steps to resume food distribution as soon as possible with the start of the lean season, making sure, of course, that we have to keep the most vulnerable in mind, the children, the malnourished children, the lactating mothers, pregnant women, and those who are still struggling to really get back to a sense of normalcy. We would like that to resume as soon as possible. But we are encouraged by your leadership in getting local action to provide solutions to what is required for us to move forward. We urge all, and I would like to commend what Mr. Redder said, we urge all stakeholders to collaborate. And this is a whole of community response that is required in good faith to address and make sure that the resources, and there are not many resources that we have, that they really go to the people in need who need it at the most. But at the same time, the opening up of Tigray to the markets, to jobs, to opportunities must go hand in hand. And of course, the governance arrangements around you in terms of limiting the corruption that is obviously happening at the moment. We are concerned about the mine, the unexploded ordnances, but I am also aware that you have put in place, and there's some action to try and curb the explosive remnants of war in a lot of the areas of the region. As we encourage schools to open and IDPs to return, farmers to get back to farming, we need to limit the impact of war on people. And so the mine action, last week I met with the Minister of Defense in Addis, and we committed with UNMAS that we would support the region in getting that work done. And we've had a good discussion on how we can work with you and with him at the federal level for that. Between mid-November last year and the end of April, quite a lot of commodities have come in. I know just under 6,500 trucks with food and non-food supplies have come in. We know fuel is in, but I think that the idea is to continue our work as the humanitarian community in making sure that the communities here help themselves with the assistance and are helping bring the institutions in Tigray to run with the programs is our primary focal point. I'd like now, if you don't mind, Your Excellency, to ask the UNDP resident rep to really present what we're trying to think ahead and respond in bridging the gap between the life-saving assistance and what we call seeing the development funds beginning to come in so that we can very, very quickly fast-track the responses that communities are asking for. Mr. Turan Saleh, over to you.
Thank you very much, RC. So our aim with this proposal is really to inject a sense of urgency among development partners, certainly to respond to the needs that go beyond the humanitarian, but actually complement the humanitarian and build on the humanitarian in Tigray, among other regions. We are ready as the United Nations system to actually begin work next month on this. We are waiting for the green light. It covers multiple areas as a single package because we think disjointed or fragmented work right now would harm the prospects of peace and the prospects of helping people. So we are looking at the issue, for example, of how regional government and local government can be strengthened to get back to capacity, maybe not 100%, but to basic functions. Second, basic services, incredibly important, health, education, WASH, and we also hope, health and nutrition, I should say, and also we hope contribute to the restart of the PSNP in Tigray, among other regions. Also, third, very important, as His Excellency was saying, how we can revive jobs, livelihoods. Quickly, people need livelihoods. They want to stand on their own 2 feet and not be reliant on assistance or handouts as they might perceive them. Enterprises, agriculture at the focus. How can we revive those? Also the issue of internal displacement, significant numbers of displaced. How can we help return them back to their homes? I think most of them want to go back home, but not with empty hands. They want to go back home, and their communities need to be ready to receive them. That's another thing. DDR, and I'll spend a little bit of time on DDR afterwards. DDR, incredibly important. And of course, as the resident coordinator was saying, UXO removal, mine removal, unexploded ordnance removal, which remains a major concern for people to go about their lives and to avoid further harm. We're hearing reports already of people being harmed as a result of not knowing about them or not knowing how to handle them properly. That's what we're hoping to do. The 24-month cost for this, for 3 northern regions, but Tigray has the largest element of focus for very clear reasons, is about $2.3 billion. We do have, thanks again to the generosity of our donors, and we do have to acknowledge that, about, we hope, between soft and hard pipeline, as we call them, money that is in the bank and money we hope will come into the bank. But discussions are ongoing, about $250 million to start with. So the UN has some resources to start with. We now need the green light from Addis to move forward, to raise further resources, because obviously there's a big financing gap. What we are doing is within the framework of, you've heard of course of this, the RRF, that is the Resilient Recovery and Reconstruction Framework that has been prepared with the support of the World Bank, led by the Ministry of Finance and Addis. So it's not a parallel or separate effort. We are very, very committed as a cardinal principle in this approach that your ownership at national level, but crucially at regional level, is vital. Your ownership, your leadership. And that implementation will not take place through parallel UN systems. They will take place through your systems. And if we have to build up capacity, which it's clear that we would have to, we will do so. That's our commitment. That's a sustainable way, and that's the proper way to move forward. So we are ready to go. We are hoping to hear favorable news. We hope, with the help of His Excellency, that we will get there. On DDR, of course, the UN is helping to help us get the commission, which is a new commission, National Rehabilitation Commission, headed by Ambassador Tashome, up and running. That's an area of emphasis. We are hoping very much that we can move to the stage of registration of combatants, ex-combatants, as a step towards demobilization. That's very important. Technical assistance are flowing in this month to help get that off the road. I do believe, as I told His Excellency, that there are requests pending with all 3 northern regions to provide information on as detailed as possible on their estimates of ex-combatants, numbers, male, female, younger, older, and so on and so forth. It's all there in a letter from the NRC. That's going to be incredibly important, so I urge the Tigray Regional Administration to kindly respond to that if it hasn't already done so. We are in the process of trying to raise resources for actual demobilization. It is expensive. It is not cheap, demobilization. We understand it's incredibly urgent. We're really trying to convey this sense of urgency to our partners. And we hope, with the number of bilateral and multilateral institutions, that there will be resources, we hope, by the middle of this year, which is not very far away, to begin the process. So let me stop there. Thank you.
Important component, if I may say, here is that they are not interested in any parallel structure of implementation. To the extent that we need to build our capacity, they will help us build our capacity, but the cardinal principle is local ownership, and whatever implementation is being envisaged is going to be implemented by the regional authority, which is a principle we all should subscribe to. Having said that, if my fellow cabinet members have questions to raise, especially those of us who are trying to create a modicum, a semblance of normalcy by sending our kids to schools, which literally do not look like schools. But at least the fact that we are sending children with the appearance of going to school will help us create a semblance of normalcy. But it shouldn't end there. We should be supported in all means. And of course, there are other areas that have been specifically mentioned by the UNDP head here, and we have also expectations with regard to putting our administrative structures back in place. There's some areas they have mentioned they would be working with us together. So I open the floor. UN agencies, fellow cabinet members, feel free to raise whatever question you might have, or to express the redoubling of your commitments to do what you have been doing well. Thank you.
The challenge, but I think as was explained, we expect also to go beyond the humanitarian interventions. This week we are starting school, and that was with many challenges, but I think the sense of normalcy should start with that kind of intervention. So there are still many challenges, no chairs, no blackboards. We don't even know how many students and teachers and etc. But we don't have any options on launching schooling and all the humanitarian interventions. So I just want to say thank you again, and we are very much committed in pursuing.
You didn't really go into it, but I think the task is colossal for you as a president and also for the cabinet members. And we are here really as a trusted partner to see how we can support, be it in terms of actual activities and operations, but also in terms of advocacy. And you can really trust assured, I mean, between Dr. Sozi and the other UN colleagues or NGO colleagues, we have been really doubling our efforts in terms of advocacy with donor members in Addis and elsewhere, other capitals, insisting to make sure that we seize the current window of opportunity of calm and security to increase our access and outreach to those who are really in need, but also to make sure that there is a different source of funding coming in. With the current, let's say, another challenge that has been added to the plate recently is about what's been discussed in terms of diversion, and we very much welcome what you just mentioned and what we know already that the administration has put in place, working with the partners to make sure that these things do not happen. I think we are really hopeful that, you know, we can together put our efforts together to make sure that we are strengthening the system. One thing that I think could be, apparently I'm not speaking loud enough, so yeah. So one thing that I think could be done is to ensure that we're doing independent assessment and targeting, maybe considering different kinds of assistance, not only in kind, but, you know, to support the sort of circular economy. And I'm sure my colleagues are very much interested to work with you and the colleagues from the cabinet to support this. Our concern is, of course, we are trying to make sure that other kind of funding comes in, but we cannot forget the humanitarian piece. And if we lose the humanitarian piece, then we would need even more to be able to get back on our feet. So in short, colossal tasks, but you know, with yourself as president and such a cabinet and us as partners, we are sure that we'll be able to overcome these obstacles.
The interim administration has decided to reopen the schools despite enormous challenges that we are facing as a result of the damages, destructions, loss, and the consequence of all these damages and loss. So currently, classes has been started since May 1. Even though May 1 was a holiday, the teachers was very eager to see their students, and the students was eager to see each other and with their teachers. So some of schools have been started since May 1, and some other schools started on May 2, May 3. So far, out of the schools we have, 837 schools has been started in the last 3 days, and the reopening will continue like that, but we have many schools also occupied by IDPs. So we haven't started the school reopening in Sheraro, Shire, Aksum, Adwa, and even here in Mekelle. Out of the 58 government schools, 23 of them are occupied by IDPs. So those, we made the registration, but the actual teaching learning process hasn't started in the schools because they are occupied by IDPs. This is one of our challenge, the IDP. And we tried to demine the schools, and we have found in more than 300 schools different explosives on the surface, and some of them are in the ground. And yeah, it is the starting part. They are starting to clean all the schools. Another challenge is, as you know, all the total population is under just waiting food aid, and you can imagine how much difficult it will be for a kid to go to school without having a breakfast. And there are certain areas, certain number of waradas that we must provide school feeding programs. It has multi-purpose. One, it is a nutrition, health of the kids. Second, it encourages so that the students go to school. So it has multi-purpose, and we wish to provide that. And last time I was, just before a day, I was in Kollatamben, and I was visiting schools when they were registering, and I found a school director, school principal, who didn't get enough paper to register his students. And you can imagine how much painful it will be for a student going to school to get registered, but the school principal turned him back so that to come the next day when he get paper, stationary paper. So the pain, the shortage is to that level. So we need support to our schools to be rehabilitated. For example, in northwestern zone, there is one warada. It has 29 schools. Yesterday, the 27 of the schools hasn't started because of the absence of blackboard. Just a blackboard. And so schools has to be rehabilitated in this back to school campaign before the reconstruction period. So schools have to rehabilitate the school, the education bureaus, including the at warada level, the school offices has to be rehabilitated. And scholastic materials are so important for our students. One pack of exercise book, pen, it costs about 2,000 birr. So you can imagine a Tigrayan farmer to offer 2,000 birr to send him his or her children to school. So it will be very difficult. Imagine if you have 2 or 3 kids, how much difficult it will be. So we have enormous challenges. We need enormous supports accordingly, but still we are working hard so that to bring something normalcy to our people. The 30% of the Tigray population is a student. So you can imagine if this 30% has its days in school, it has its own positive impact for the sustainability of the peace, the healing, and many multifaceted challenges. Thank you so much.
My intervention is I have a question, and that is, in light of the enormity of the damage and enormity of the problem, the colossal nature that has been that has been inflicted on the people of Tigray, and in light of the scarcity of resources, even internationally, what do you think are the challenges in terms of bringing not all the resources, but enough resources to Tigray, both internationally and at the level of central government? And how do you intend to resolve some of the problems some of the challenges that you are facing or you might face in the future? Thank you.
It's collective strength. I was a proud member of the UN system. I worked for the UNDP, and I know what the UN system coming together can deliver. So the collective strength and the further thinking But there are also certain specifics. Probably they are captured already in the proposal that you mentioned. And you mentioned the importance of jobs, and that's quite critical. So many thousands of micro and small enterprises have to go to businesses. Some of them also have employees, but to restart, they obviously need financing. For some of them, it's working capital. For some of them, it could be a startup capital altogether because the businesses have been completely disabolished. Or, so that's an important consideration. The other is, you rightly mentioned the importance of working or using the government structure and institutional system rather than a parallel one. But again, a specific question as to what government institutions have to do on our part in preparation for taking the full advantage of the support that the UN system is coming up with. And the third question is, again, probably more specific, but I think it's important. If it's possible to explore the use of technology in education, in areas where there is an internet system. Some costs were being mentioned earlier, and the costs that you would incur to duplicate teaching materials, textbooks, so on and so forth. And as you know, tablets these days are extremely cheap. They are down to $60 or so. And in that case, it may be worth considering wherever there is an effective internet working system, because but it can easily replace, and you can use the textbook and hard copy materials to areas where internet does not function. So these specific questions. Thank you.
What I just wanted to say is that I'm representing 73 international NGOs that are operating in Ethiopia, and many of our members have remained and stayed to support the people of Tigray throughout the crisis, and we will continue to do so. We have been looking at ways to improve the response in terms of emergency response, but also addressing the longer-term needs of people in terms of development, in terms of reconstruction, in terms of reconciliation as well. We are definitely facing reduced funding at a time where we would actually need more, but we are dedicated to continue the support to the people of Tigray. We are advocating towards donors, both in country and abroad, to make sure that we secure that direct support to the communities and to the people, both in rural and in urban areas. One thing that I wanted also to say is that we have great concerns of our teams that have stayed on here throughout the crisis and that have also suffered huge traumas. We are collectively, through the forum, looking at ways to support these teams. And we will start by, in the month of May, actually doing a collective training on trauma management for our area managers to be able to support their teams in this time and try to ensure that the do no harm principle also applies to our operations. And this will be basically the beginning of looking at what collectively our NGOs can do to support our teams, to support the people. So yes, thank you very much, and happy also to discuss and to be here. Thank you.
Just to say thank you so much, President, as well as Catherine and my colleagues. Just to complement a bit, first of all, just to say that indeed, as Catherine has mentioned, we have stayed with the people of Tigray and people living here in Tigray during all these difficult times. We have seen some of the efforts made to reopen schools, including between February 2022 and August 2022. So when I hear from the head of the Education Bureau and all of you about the importance of education and the sense of normalcy, that we fully agree. So including during difficult times. I think we are now at a time when not only the confluence of both IDPs and education are critical. Yesterday I was here, I went to visit the Emperor Johannes School, where with the regional government authorities and our teams, we are supporting with NGO partners the return of some of the IDPs. Glad that at least 5 of these schools, I think 4 around Mekelle, 1 around Adigrat, will be really emptied based on voluntary return of IDPs, return to areas where they are safe, exactly along the lines that Catherine has mentioned. That really take 5 schools out of this situation, and we are ready to continue. So it's not only really about saying we will be doing something, we are doing quite a lot, and we will continue doing this. So this is a reaffirmation of our commitment to support people living here for both protection solutions and action. There have been, I think, a question around the support solutions in complementing Turhan, and Turhan really spoke, as Catherine mentioned, and he mentioned, in name of 18 UN agencies coming together, working together. Agencies like mine that work on protection and solutions for refugees, IDPs, etc., the Development Agency, IOM, all these agencies, UNICEF, all of us coming together and trying to make sure that we are supporting you throughout this period of time. But issues around funding and financing are going to be very critical. Michelle has mentioned the need for looking for additional financial mechanism. It's going to be very clear, very important. The fact that we are committed to work with you, not to create parallel systems, to deliver. These are all ingredients. So if you pass on these key messages, it is going to help us. It is going to help us. It's going to help the the RCAC to as well as the federal authorities to get more resources. So I would say to you, maybe we do not have a silver bullet, but if we really join our efforts together, that would help us. And this is also one of the importance of this meeting. I think the final point I wanted to raise, and this one I will need my glasses. Thank you very much. That's not technology. Perhaps just to emphasize the need for the sense of normalcy. I met with 2 heads of bureaus yesterday, and they were all really raising issues around the governance. And we have expertise, we have capabilities. We know that in Tigray, unlike other regions, if you are given some of these capabilities sooner, you can really help us move forward. So that's also a point we want to make. I will not say this everywhere in the country, but in here in particular, I want to emphasize that. So you have quite a good faith in your administration into helping us, help you, help yourself, and helping our people here. Thank you very much, Yaganelle.
You know that we are in transition to the recovery, but still our people, almost more than 90% of our people needs humanitarian assistance. The humanitarian assistance should continue, should not be paused. And also, in relation to in general, the people of Tigray, victim of this war, trauma healing and stress management is needed. Intensive support is needed in this case. Again, in relation to my sector, TVET colleges, TVT colleges are going to be a center for integration and also, for returning as well as in DDR, but they don't have any equipment, any machine, everything is destroyed, everything is looted. So we hope you will support us and we will solve it together. Thank you very much.
Thank you for staying with us during the darkest hours. We still have difficulties and we have faith that will continue to support us. I'm also glad to hear that you have plans to continue the humanitarian response, but you'd like to bridge it with developmental activities. That's really great to hear. So I have very few questions. I would love to hear your reflections. The first issue is if representatives of the UNAIDS is around, HIV was completely forgotten during the past few years. All international NGOs and UN agencies were not really paying attention to this particular problem. There are worrisome trends here in Tigray, and this requires huge support. We are sending out messages to UNAIDS. I'm not sure if it has actually reached, but it's going to really affect quite a lot. So our population were vulnerable in this respect. So if I could hear your reflections. The second point is if the UN system does anything with regard to the care of the wounded. Again, this affects almost every household in Tigray. The government of Tigray alone or the federal government of Ethiopia alone will not be able to handle the problems. Only ICRC is trying to support, and it's beyond their capacity. So if I could hear, if there's anything you do as a UN, I would be glad to hear that. And any plans to carry out school feeding programs in the future, and also any plans to strengthen our regulatory capacity. Yes, all international NGOs and UN agencies do participate in providing services to our people, but the support provided to regulating our services, our system is not really there. It's almost non-existent. So any plans to do that? My last point is a question of flexibility. International NGOs are trying to operate in Tigray. They are supporting. UN agencies are also supporting, but the issue of flexibility, sometimes, however small the money might be, if it really is geared towards addressing our real challenge, it really means a lot. Like to a particular health center in the countryside, it might require one laboratory machine, or a hospital, if we buy one X-ray machine, that could really solve huge problems rather than employing like 10 individuals. And at the end of the day, those 10 individuals will get out of work, and system strengthening will not be there. So I see problems with flexibility in terms of using funds. So if I could hear your responses, I would be glad. Thank you.
I think there was some question, most of it was information actually. I know there was one question about resource mobilization. There is no doubt that resources are limited. What is required to fix everything to where it was even before the conflict is absolutely ginormous. And we know that there are efforts to mobilize resources in country, but also mobilizing resources out of the country. And with the geopolitical situation at the moment, it's not likely to come now at the moment. That's all I can say. I think it's my job, together with some of my colleagues, to mobilize resources for the humanitarian. Yes. For the humanitarian response, we haven't even managed to get a third of what we need for the whole country, let alone for Tigray. So it's a tough environment. One of the things that we decided in our HRP was to include a third objective, which says deliver humanitarian assistance with also a development lens. Everywhere you see the need, consider what it is that we can do developmentally so that we avoid those situations. Of course, the biggest one for here is peace. How do we maintain the peace so that we don't have this coming again? Because otherwise it will just require more crises, and for the civilians population, it will just be more damaging and impact them long term. The next thing, of course, is as you're responding to seeds provision, fertilizer provision, buy the seeds from the market. How do you then encourage economic livelihoods, give catalytic funding for women to sort of, start businesses? We must remember that we are not here to remove the agency of people. People know how they provide their solutions if they're given startup, if they're encouraged to move. I think one area, though, that I would really want to point out is really the response to the sexual gender-based violence. It must not stop. It must be invested in, and it needs to continue and will probably continue for years to come. There's a potential for crises to be forgotten and assumed that money will just fix itself. So constant advocacy. And I know, Your Excellency, you're also meeting with some of the donors at the capitals, some of them who are coming in country, and so it's important that that advocacy is done jointly together. And I really do believe in giving more weight around cash.
Yes.
Cash. Really, even if it's for the life-saving assistance. Instead of big bales of wheat, in order to encourage the markets, give women, men, cash so that they can find ways in which they're going to make their living, rather than us dictating what they are required.
That's also what the Americans are trying to do.
Aha, okay.
Shifting away from food, whatever,
yeah,
to cash. I
yeah.
don't know how that works.
I think we've got a cash working group. The NGOs are on it, the UN, the government structures. So it's something that we have trying to build, and it gives us confidence within the community when they can decide what they need to move in place. The investment in the government structure, yes, and that's the role of UNDP, really around the governance, the institutions, the administration, not only here, but at the Warada level, the Kebele level. We need that. We need the civilian police. You need the general functionings, and that needs resources, and it's part of the UN peace support proposal in order to bring that ahead. On the technology in education, certainly there's the Digital 2025, which is a Ethiopia proposal, and ITU is working already with Ministry of Education at the national level. The question is to bring it down to the regions to ensure that but to be honest with you, I think with the peace support that the UN is putting in place, it's the basics that are required to get. The blackboards are basics, the books are basics, and those are all part of the proposal that we put forward. We are making suggestions about supporting the procurement, because we do have quick measures of doing that, but I think that, again, the planning needs to be done here, together with the colleagues in the room. And I think, and then on the HIV, I completely agree with you. I tried, the UNAIDS country director actually was supposed to join the mission here with us, but unfortunately she had a conflicting meeting, but I think it's one area that I think that needs to be stepped up. There's a UN team on AIDS, which includes all the agencies here working on HIV, not just the provision of treatment, but also the prevention commodities, the education, and everything else that needs to happen, including the reduction of stigma. But I will send that message back to the country director, Françoise, and I've encouraged her to actually make a trip. There's a message here.
Yes.
Okay, I get the message. Right. Now, on the work of disability, I think, again, ICRC, for sure, very good work that they do around ICRC, but we've included it into the UN Peace Support proposal. We would like your national institutions to take on that role, really. I mean, as we said, we're not trying to set up a separate UN entity to do it, but the agencies here would be working with you, institutional capacity strengthening, to do what you're supposed to do, working with some of the NGOs as well, who also do amazing work with communities worldwide on disability and rehabilitation. So that is something that we would take behind. I think that's what I had. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sol. In fact, what I can say at this point is that there is a clearly manifested readiness and willingness by the UN agencies to continue to be partners, not only on humanitarian issues, but also on our development efforts, including recovery and construction. So as long as there is that willingness, it remains for us to take advantage of that willingness and to draw on their collective strengths, as Dr. Gabriot has pointed out. And the first order of business is to start by comparing our notes. What are our needs and what are the kinds of things you are planning to do? So we'll plan together. Once we plan together, we'll work with a sense of ownership, with a sense of responsibility, and of course with a sense of urgency. That's why I was being stingy on the use of time. Yes. And I know her schedule is very tight, and she should be hitting the road by now. So we will do our part. Here in the regional administration, we cannot afford to fail. To fail in Tigray at this point in time is to sentence the entire Tigrayan population to near certain death. So we have to succeed. And if we have to succeed, we might as well succeed with people who have the willingness and the resources to work with us, to partner with us. Thank you.
What's the visit all about?
Our visit, I came this time because it's the first time I've been here as resident and humanitarian coordinator since the setup of the interim regional administration. So I came together with some colleagues from the UN system to follow up on our humanitarian operations and to really re-emphasize that we're still committed as the United Nations system, together with the international non-government organization members who came with us, to continue the life-saving assistance to people in Tigray. But we also said that we came also to give feedback from what I heard in January from the communities who said, yes, life-saving assistance is good, but we also want our children to go back to school, the clinics to start working, for us to start jobs and livelihoods. And so we came back to say that we have started that discussion amongst ourselves. We want to sit with Tigrinians in Tigray on how we can do this, and that we are trying to mobilize resources to be able to do this, to encourage and get that sense of normalcy for Tigray people to feel during this peacetime. The cessation of hostilities agreement was a very important agreement, and it is still holding even now on May the 4th. And so we want to say to people, it's a good thing, let us move forward. What can we do to support you to get onto your feet again?
What about the recent decision by the UN to stop aid?
Yes, we also came to say that definitely the diversion of food assistance is not good. You know, having resources at the moment to do anything in the world, and in particularly in Ethiopia, is very difficult. The food should be going to the people who need it the most. So when you start finding food in markets being sold for cash, in places where it shouldn't be, then that is something that we would like to discourage. We, as the United Nations, are doing our own internal investigations, and we have set up an internal committee under my leadership. But I'm also glad to hear that the president here has also set up a task force to try and investigate, because we all want the same thing. The food assistance is necessary, but it needs to go to the people who need it the most and must not be sold on the market. That in itself is really unacceptable. So we want the investigations to be done very, very quickly so that we get back on track. At this moment in time, we're aiming to get it within the next few weeks in June, so that life continues for many of the people. But the concern, of course, is for the malnourished children. So the resources that are there will continue. But for us to get back on track, we need to ensure that the controls that we have in our system and that are on the government side as well are strict enough so that the food goes to the required beneficiaries.